Hi, I'm Benton Stokes.
And I'm Elane O'Rourke.
And this is Cocktail Theology. Hello there.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm good. You know why?
Why?
It is the end of the day.
It is.
I am looking at you and talking with you.
Aw.
And you made us something.
Yes. The cocktail that we're going to enjoy is a light and fizzy one on the sweeter side, but it's called El Diablo, and I can't tell you why. It probably needs maybe a rebranding.
Maybe.
It has tequila. Mm-hmm. It has creme de cassis, which is black currant, which is one of your favorite things.
True.
And then it's got also some lime juice, and then it is topped off with some ginger beer.
Did this come from David Leibovitz's book, Drinking French?
It did.
Okay,
yeah,
good. Cool.
It did.
Fun.
So let's try it. Oh, that's nice.
It is. Not what I expected at all. It's tasty.
Yeah, it's really tasty.
There you go. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah,
and be horrified that I called him Dave. Anyway, that's
probably. Fine. And we were lucky enough to find currants at the grocery the other day.
It was so nice.
I know, it's just a rarity.
For those of you who are listening and have no idea why this is exciting, so red and black currants are these little tiny fruits that are a little bit tart, a little bit sweet. And they're really, really hard to get where we are because in 1912 they were banned in the United States. So I got them and I was like immediately sending pictures off to our friend Evan saying, look, I got currants, because he doesn't live here. I got currants. And he was very excited for me, which I appreciated.
Yeah, it was very nice of him to be so excited.
It was.
So this is yummy.
It is.
And today we are going to be discussing something that was brought to us by our listener, Laura.
Hi, listener Laura.
And listener Laura reached out to ask, what do you call yourself when you'd rather not be associated with Christians, but want to share that you are in fact a Christian, I suppose?
Yeah, it's not a weird question.
No, it's really not.
And actually, it reminds me of that episode we did. What was it called?
Is Christianity doing more harm than good?
Okay.
That was back in 2018, yeah. And we actually got into this quite a bit, and sadly went back and listened to that episode again, and things really haven't changed all that much.
No.
But at the time, President Trump was in power, and the Christian right was having its day in the sun, and it was not a fun time for those of us that actually care about what the term Christian means. We really haven't progressed.
No, we haven't. Sigh. Okay.
Yeah. So the question that she was posing was, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but we'll say she espouses Christian values, like actual Christian values, not values that have been listed as Christian in the biggest scare quotes I can possibly come up with. But how do you do that if you don't want to be equated with those other folks?
Right. Is it okay if we broaden this to include the other folks?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Maybe a different question could be, if I assume that my variety of Christian is not necessarily everyone's variety of Christian, whether I think they're heretics or not.
Right.
How do I distinguish my variety of Christian?
Oh, yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Would that be okay?
Of course.
Because I want to believe that there are evangelicals, for example, who also are afraid that they're going to be mistaken for some other brand of Christian. Mm-hmm. And it isn't that they hate the other brand of Christian, it's just that's not who they are.
Right.
So I want to kind of widen that if we can.
I like that. Okay.
Beats me. No. So it occurs to me as we're talking about this that almost every blank Christian, progressive Christian, liberal Christian, evangelical Christian, Pentecostal, whatever those are, almost all of those come out of a political movement of one kind or another.
Mm.
They may also come out of an intellectual movement.
Yeah.
But intellectual movements and political movements are often really closely aligned, so it can be hard to tell the difference. Mm-hmm. But it did occur to me as we were talking about this that one of the problems is that, so that as we're using those qualifiers, we are sort of aligning ourselves with particular politics, even if that's not what we mean to do.
Right. I see what you mean.
And that's not true across the board, but there's that undercurrent. So there's part of the problem. All right. So what are you calling yourself these days?
That's a fine question. In the episode that I was listening to earlier that we recorded a few years ago, I was pretty adamantly against the term Christian at that point. I would say that my feelings on the views that are espoused by people that are calling themselves Christian in this country, and in that episode, I talked quite a bit about how the media was fairly complicit in that because at the time, because white evangelicals were so powerful, they were in the news all the time. And the term evangelical or even white evangelical and Christian had become pretty interchangeable. And that was really frustrating to me because I thought, as someone that comes out of an evangelical tradition, I mean, I understand what a fundamentalist believes, basically. And I know that that's not what I believe. And then I also understand what the evangelicals as a political movement believe or espouse or promote or, are trying to put upon all of us. And I don't believe or espouse any of that either.
Right.
So it was really frustrating to me. And I think it still is, even though the rhetoric isn't as daily as it used to be and isn't quite as loud as it used to be, it's still very, very much there. We're just not hearing it in the media as much. At least it's not getting tagged as Christian or evangelical nearly as much as it was back in 2018.
Right.
So I would still say that I kind of avoid the term Christian as I'm relating to myself. If I do say that I'm a Christian, I usually qualify it with the word progressive. And mostly that's because for me, and again, because these labels are not objective, I wouldn't assume that another person that says they're progressive Christian believes exactly what I believe, right?
Right.
But for me, that means that I don't have issue with women in leadership at church, for instance, and I don't have issue with gays and lesbians and queer folk worshiping with everybody else. There are a lot of things that probably would cause me to be branded a liberal Christian, but because I don't come from a mainline or liberal background, that's not exactly a term that I understand completely, and it's not one that I feel really comfortable applying to myself. And I've never been a member of a mainline church, so I can't really say that I'm a mainline Christian. So progressive seems to fit me the best.
Okay.
But Jesus follower is the one that I really prefer.
Okay.
Because I feel like what that says is I pay attention to Jesus. And that's kind of the end of the sentence for me. What about you? Right? Big old shrug.
Yeah, I get really stuck. I'm often in the position of describing what we do and what our position is.
Right.
And so when I'm writing text about that, I usually say very broadly Christian. And what I mean by that is not vaguely Christian. I mean that we draw on many, many traditions to inform our understanding of what it means to follow Jesus, seek after God, practice our faith, all of that.
Right.
And that when I say it, I mean that we might also draw on traditions that wouldn't be called Christian, but that are not antithetical to the faith. Okay.
Right.
Dallas Willard, who would not consider himself either a liberal or a progressive Christian, did say, just because Hindus eat breakfast doesn't make breakfast bad.
Right.
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 So following that line a little bit, tongue in cheek, there's plenty of wisdom from around the world to be gathered.
Definitely.
But if it is antithetical to my understanding of Jesus's take on the relationship with God, it is not something that I draw from. So lately I've been saying broadly Christian.
I like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I like it, but it's the best I'm going to do. So I was really glad when you were talking about progressive versus liberal and so forth, that you brought up the mainline church and liberal tradition, because these are distinctions that may not matter to anybody, but I feel like they need to be made.
Sure.
There is a difference between liberal Christianity and progressive Christianity. I'm not sure that people who call themselves liberal or call themselves progressive actually know that there's a distinction.
Yeah.
Right? But there is.
Right.
So liberal Christianity comes out of the Enlightenment.
Okay.
Okay? It is an intellectual movement. So it was and is the traditions that come out of an understanding of the world that is less mystical and more practical,
Okay.
and that has included in it science, a more modern view of history, empiricism, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So all of those things influenced particularly Protestant Christianity, and that's what it meant by liberal. So that language of liberal in this case is more tied to the liberal arts college
Sure.
than it is to politically liberal.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yes.
And that's where most of our what we call mainline denominations came from, is that stream of Christianity, liberal Christianity in that sense.
Okay.
Catholics, Episcopals, Anglicans would not count as that
Yep.
because it isn't that they weren't influenced, it's that that's not where they sprung.
No, they were already there.
They were already there, right?
They're more the historical church.
Exactly. Exactly. So liberal Christian is in that line, and then from there, around the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, you get a distinction between the social gospel and fundamentalism, but also other forms of Christianity, where the social gospel comes out of the liberal tradition and actually out of a part of Catholicism, which is interesting. But it has to do with what does it mean to engage in the world as a Christian, concerned about poverty, concerned about doing unto others, concerned about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that can influence politics as well. But it starts from what do I do about my starving neighbor?
Right.
And then it can wind up going in all kinds of directions from there.
Right.
So if you kind of think about liberal Christian as being akin to liberal arts, coming out of the Enlightenment, that kind of thing. Social gospel, coming out of the idea that the primary thrust of Jesus in our lives is to do unto others. And then progressive is a whole other thing. That's part of the distinction that we're making.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
The mainline churches, by and large, come out of that liberal Christian tradition. But what that language actually means is the ones that in the 40s and 50s were the predominantly social, structural churches.
Right. The churches that were building essentially community centers in neighborhoods. Right.
Yep. And, food pantries and all of that kind of stuff at a time when that didn't narrow down who they were. So you can have in the mainline churches a very wide swath of theology. But what it meant was they were part of the social structure of the United States in a way that other churches didn't aspire to be and weren't broadly.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
So if you look at presidents, for example, most of them came out of what we would now call the mainline church. And the mainline church, of course, has been in decline ever since churches weren't the center of the community.
Right.
So then we have all the other distinctions, right?
Yeah.
I admit I have trouble with progressive because it has meant over time just this side of Unitarian Universalist.
Okay.
Now, there's nothing wrong with Unitarian Universalism, but it's not Christian.
Right.
So there was a stretch of time when progressive came out of some of the more intellectually reformist and spiritually reformist writers and took on a set of tenets as the basis of progressive Christianity that didn't have to do with politics, affected politics, but weren't started by politics, that I personally found too non-Jesus, non-Christ to count as Christian.
Okay.
Because I am deeply convinced if you're going to call yourself Christian, you got to be wrestling with Christ.
Yes.
You got to be making sense out of what does it mean?
Right.
Jesus Christ.
Right.
If you're not wrestling with that, you're not a Christian. That's not bad, but you're not. So I have trouble with that. Now, that whole group has sort of changed its language and changed the way it thinks. But as a result, I have a little trouble with that, even though I'm politically Very progressive.
Right, and I think that's why that tag seems to resonate with me for myself, because I believe that I have, as a Christian, I have progressive values, especially when you group me with other Christians. My values would tend toward more progressive ideals than conservative ideals.
So that takes care of kind of that end of it, right?
Right.
But then you've got, I would consider at least two other ends of it.
Okay.
You've got the historical church.
Yeah.
And those would be the ones that think apostolically. That is, Peter touched so-and-so who touched so-and-so who touched so-and-so who touched so-and-so who touched that bishop who touched me, right? So that's the apostolic tradition.
Right.
They think that way. They tend to have a view, whether each individual does or not, doesn't matter, but they have a view, the historical church has a view that what it is doing is connected to what is happening in the heavens.
Right.
Not that they affect it. They're trying to mirror in a particular way what's happening in the heavens. They don't randomly change their liturgy.
Right.
Part of the idea is that the liturgy goes back all the way, right? Whether it does or not, that's the idea.
Right.
So that's the historical church, and there are various varieties of them. They have different political views. They have different cultural views, completely, radically different, but they all come out of the historical tradition. None of them would describe themselves as a historical Christian.
No.
So that would be Orthodox, Catholic, Episcopal, Anglican, those groups primarily. But the problem is, there are 100 varieties of Catholic officially.
Wow. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and I don't mean that the popes all say there are 100 different varieties. But the fact is the Jesuit tradition is different than the Franciscan tradition,
Right.
is different than Teresa of Avila, is different than, right?
Right.
Because they've been around so long. You have these very long threads that weave together. So you've got that whole set. And then coming over to the other side, what I would include in the revivalist churches, they don't all come out of American 18th, 19th, early 20th century revivalism, but they bear some quality to that. And they tend to be very locally focused. Now, that has changed since the evangelical church decided to become a political powerhouse.
Yeah.
But they tend to think in terms of the local congregation having its own right and rule, but being grounded in what we say is a high Christology. That is the idea that Jesus as Son of God, eternal, is more important, more valuable, more unique than Jesus, the man who walked the earth.
Yeah.
Okay? And so if you're going to talk about Jesus, what you're really talking about is Christ, Son of God.
Okay.
Okay? So those two kinds of things are pretty substantially part of those churches.
Yeah.
There also tends to be an emphasis on the Spirit, even if it's a very scared emphasis, like with the fundamentalists, right?
Right.
But there's still this sense that is important somehow. The image of God tends to be a very Christian view of the Old Testament God,
Yes.
not a Jewish view of the Old Testament God, where God is a lawgiver, God is the strict father, and so forth, right? That tends to be part of the evangelical, etc. group over there.
Yeah.
So if that's the way you think about yourself, if that's the way you see your relationship with God, if you see Jesus as primarily Savior, Son of God, rather than in the flesh, healer, feeder of people, that kind of thing, then you're more likely to be on the end of what we would call conservative Christianity, evangelical Christianity, fundamentalist Christianity.
Right.
Because of some really hard work since the end of the 19th century, and particularly in the late 70s up until now, those are also highly identified with extreme Republican or radical in that direction views,
Right.
which was intentional. We've talked about this before.
Yes. Yeah.
But as a result, that tends to be lumped in with those because that's the way it's been promoted for a very long time by the political wings of those churches.
Right. Seriously. So I think maybe for the benefit of our listeners who tend not to be of that group, I think because tags are so subjective, as people of faith, as Christians, or however you want to tag yourself, I think it's really important to know what you believe. That doesn't mean you have to have answers for everything.
No.
But the things that you really, truly hold close and that are ideas that you act on, beliefs. I think that's where you can start to figure out what your label is, if you want a label. In the episode that we listened to today, you made the point that if we aren't calling ourselves Christians, then we're really leaving the label in the hands of people who are basically using it, co-opting the name of Jesus to get what they want or whatever, and it really doesn't have anything to do with Jesus. If the tag is ever to be redeemed, we are the ones to do that by representing Jesus in our actions and making sure that when we are acting in ways that, help others, that when we are loving and serving other people and we're doing things in the name of Jesus, that we make sure people know that's what we're doing. We're doing this because we love Jesus. We're doing this because this is what Jesus teaches us to do, and this is what Jesus did.
Right.
And I completely agree with that. So the challenge for listeners like Laura, when you don't want to be grouped in with this evangelical power base, with all of the things that go along with that, then I think it's important that you do the soul searching and figure out, well, then what tag fits me? How can I describe myself, or how can I describe my work, ministry work or service or whatever? How can I describe that in a way that brings the attention, the glory, if you will, back to God, and back to Jesus? And this is why I do what I do. This is my motivation. And I don't know that I have an answer for that.
Right.
Except that I think all of us have to individually figure out, well, what is a tag that seems to fit me?
Right.
Is it Jesus follower? Is it, I don't know, person of faith? If getting in the Jesus weeds is too much and you just want to identify to God, you can say I'm a person of faith or I'm a follower of God. The term that we came up with back in 2018 was a seeker of God in the way of Jesus.
Right.
Or a follower of God in the way of Jesus, which I love that. But it is a little long.
It is long. It is long. Maybe this is going to be kind of weird. Christ curious.
I kind of like that.
Which kind of fits in with our political peoples, right? That idea of Christ curious. But there's something in that, I think.
I like that.
That suggests that you're trying to figure it out.
Right.
Like you have said multiple times, and I've said in different contexts, context is everything, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm talking to somebody who's a Hindu, I would probably say something that I come out of a set of Christian traditions. Those are my touchstones culturally. But I don't think that Christians perfectly interpret God.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Right. So I would probably put it that way. Or, anybody who is a person of faith, but not of the faith that I work with. So I would probably do that. Yeah. If I were talking to a secular person, it would depend upon the context. If it were a political context and the person was secular, I'd probably say something like, I hold progressive values that are informed by the experiences of oppressed people globally and locally. But I do that because Jesus got me to do that. I'd probably do something along those lines.
I like that. I like that.
If I were talking to other Christians, like Orthodox Christians, for example, I would say I come out of a set of Protestant traditions, but value the threads that come from the historical church, like yours.
Yeah, that's nice.
And then if I were talking to evangelicals or fundamentalists or something, I might just say, yeah, I'm not a Christian.
I'm a left-wing whack job.
I'm a left-wing whack job and proud of it.
And proud of it, that's right.
But I mean, I hold a higher Christology than a lot of them do.
It's true.
Yeah.
Listeners, I don't know if this is a conundrum that you
or if this was
deal
helpful.
With. I hope this was helpful. And Laura, I definitely hope this was helpful for you. There are not any really hard and fast answers for these kinds of questions. But I think probably many of our listeners share with us the frustration that we feel when Christians, that big umbrella term, is applied to people that espouse values that simply are not of Jesus the way that we understand. So if you're frustrated like we are, we'd love to hear from you. Also, if you disagree with us, we would love to hear from you. We always welcome disagreement as long as it's polite disagreement. You can always reach out to us at cocktailtheology.com. We love hearing from you always. And wherever you're listening right now, if you would just click that subscribe button or follow if you haven't already, we would appreciate that. And that way we just show up in your feed all the time.
All the time.
That's right. Well, until next time, folks, call yourself whatever you want. And
Exactly.
we'll join you again next time.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.